When I started playing Tears of the Kingdom, I thought to myself, oh man, this game's gonna be so good and perfect and easy to talk about in a YouTube video. And then 160 hours later, I thought to myself, well, shit. Tears of the Kingdom is a game preceded by its reputation and defined by expectations. It wasn't just some new title coming out of nowhere, it had to follow up Breath of the Wild, for God's sake. In the eyes of many players, the value of Tears of the Kingdom wasn't in what this game is or what it contains, but what it was supposed to be, what it needed to be, and whether or not it fulfilled that role. The roles it then had to fill weren't easy, nor were they the same for everyone. For those who held previous Zelda games dear, maybe it needed to feel more true to the storytelling or dungeon design of previous games, as many were apt to describe Breath of the Wild with the phrase, "not enough Zelda." For those who didn't like the sandbox nature of Breath of the Wild, it needed more structure, or to evolve in some grand new way. For those who loved Breath of the Wild, it needed to stay true to the magic of its predecessor while innovating and expanding on a game already bursting with freedom and creativity. Put all these together, and it makes sense why Zelda discourse can feel like watching strict parents get upset that their kid would rather build Bionicles than pass the SAT at age 7. It's basically impossible for this game to just work for everyone. Don't get me wrong, Tears of the Kingdom has received near universal acclaim, and the journey alone is so enthralling that many players, new and old, won't even think twice about the problems that stem from its sheer scale. But the bigger a game is, the more there is to talk about, and the easier it is to critique. You don't see me doing a deep dive on a short hike or Sayonara Wild Hearts because they're over in the blink of an eye, but it's an uphill battle for an open world RPG like Zelda or Elden Ring. I don't bring all this up to say that Tears of the Kingdom is a disappointment. It's one of the greatest gaming experiences I've ever had, and unless the new Mario game sends me $10,000 in an unmarked envelope, it's a shoo-in for my game of the year. But as much as I'd love to do nothing but gush about it in my own private bubble, I feel strangely captivated by the complex discourse surrounding the relationship it has with its predecessor. Breath of the Wild is now 6 years old, and while it has developed its fair share of critiques, it was easy for me to make a video filled with nothing but praise as it redefined what I thought was possible for an open world adventure. But while Breath of the Wild was the breath of fresh air, Tears of the Kingdom is a direct sequel. Doing it again. Getting to play a new and improved version of one of the best games ever made is a privilege one rarely gets to experience on this hell of an earth, but as the novelty of the first game wears off, it is even more difficult to approach some form of nuanced discussion on an experience this mind-blowingly massive. So in this video, I want to delve into how Tears of the Kingdom still manages to bring new life to its open world formula despite the massive expectations placed upon it, and how it proves that a 10 out of 10 experience doesn't ever have to be perfect. I'm doing little air quotes. However, it'd be remiss to not also discuss the ways in which the game falters, because from an optimistic point of view, it's kind of incredible that an experience that can captivate my very soul for over 100 hours still feels like it could be so much better. So much more. It'll be like fixing my favorite game, so to speak. Wait, shit, don't tell Raz. When Breath of the Wild was released to critical and commercial acclaim, one of the dissenting opinions I'd often hear was that there wasn't enough Zelda. It didn't really feel like a Zelda game. Whether that be the dungeons, storyline, characters, or general gameplay loop, something was missing for hardcore Zelda fans. Despite being a lifelong gamer myself, I've never really gotten into the Zelda franchise. Only one I remember beating is A Link Between Worlds on the 3DS, which means I don't really know what a Zelda game is supposed to feel like. Whether things change or stay the same, there always seems to be negative reactions to new Zelda games. At first, some people didn't like the bright cell shading of Wind Waker, or the somber tone shift of Twilight Princess, or funnily enough, the traditional linearity of Skyward Sword. With the way my brain overanalyzes everything I play, I'm honestly glad there's not some inner voice screaming about how I liked the water temple from Ocarina of Time better, or how Link doing a kickflip on his shield doesn't make sense unless Tears of the Kingdom takes place in the timeline where Tony Hawk stole the Triforce. This weight of unrealistic expectations can make it hard for people to look at any new entry in a franchise with open eyes, becoming too attached to their own nostalgia to let the game chart its own path. This sentiment isn't just applicable to Tears of the Kingdom either. In recent months, Final Fantasy XVI has had its own share of controversy after not feeling like Final Fantasy, and I've read various concerns expressed by Armored Core fans on how the newest entry might change the formula for newcomers, despite the fact that if game developers kept making the same game over and over again, it would be kinda boring. While it's alright to consider how Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom pay homage to the legacy of the Zelda franchise, trying to get the circle to fit in the square hole just feels disrespectful, especially when the developers were specifically looking to rediscover the spirit of Zelda by moving past linear design conventions. However, while I was able to approach this game without a list of Zelda boxes it needed to tick, that doesn't mean it was able to waltz around with no expectations. In fact, I think the biggest factor in how any given player will feel about Tears of the Kingdom is whether or not they've played Breath of the Wild, which I have. While I did just kinda make the circle in the square hole analogy, I think looking at Tears of the Kingdom against the backdrop of its predecessor provides a lot of insight into its greatest improvements and disappointments. After all, before the title drop, this game was referred to as the sequel to Breath of the Wild. While Breath of the Wild's intro is best remembered for its initial exit from the cave and breathtaking walk onto the bright expanses of the Great Plateau, Tears of the Kingdom opens somewhat differently. A low drone and slow heartbeat accompany the subdued title reveal before beginning an ominous trek through the castle's underground ruins. Disaster quickly strikes as the wrinkled, rotting corpse of Ganon awakens, and even the Master Sword seems no match for the corruption that rots away Link's arm as he fails to rescue Zelda. The Great Sky Island is then introduced in such a bright and triumphant fashion that as I dove through the endless skies, things did feel brand new again. As I explored the beautiful Zonai ruins against a stunning backdrop of endless clouds, warm yellow foliage, and a gentle saxophone, encountering strange new allies and enemies while becoming acquainted with Link's new powers, it really felt as if the sky was the limit. Until I dove down to Hyrule and went, oh, I'm back. While Breath of the Wild redefined the open world, Tears of the Kingdom tasked itself with rekindling that magic and finding ways to make its flame burn brighter. So in many ways, it is Breath of the Wild 2. If you were to start with this game, it'd blow your fucking mind. But there's not as much of a momentous leap this time around. On some levels, it's the same shrine formats, same combat mechanics, same graphics, same Hyrule. And yet there's something special about it. As I settled into the wide-eyed sense of exploration that defined the first game, I identified a certain feeling, handcrafted for those who did play Breath of the Wild. Now, it wasn't in complex storytelling or world consistency because, one, it's Nintendo, they could do more with their stories, but I never really expect it from them. Two, they obviously wanted Tears of the Kingdom to be a standalone starting point, and three, where the fuck did the Sheikah go? Instead, if Breath of the Wild was like meeting a new best friend, Tears of the Kingdom is like reconnecting with them after years apart. You load up the game and it feels like no time has passed since you last talked, and yet there's so many new stories to tell. Things that were once familiar have changed and evolved, and as you reminisce about all the places you've been, you feel the passage of time as you learn how the world has changed for both of you since you last spoke. For fans of the first game, seeing how much the major regions have changed makes revisiting the same map still feel exciting. Even though most people still don't know who Link is, you can see the impact of the temporary peace he created, and hear of Zelda's tireless efforts to help the kingdom expand. The once quiet villages of Kakariko and Hateno now spend time dealing with surges of tourism, while the leaders of the major cities continue to grapple with their newfound responsibilities amidst the upheaval. If Breath of the Wild was about taking the careful first steps into a vast world, a sprout making its first reaches towards the sun in the shadow of an ancient civilization, Tears of the Kingdom is about moving past the calamity and nurturing that life, helping it expand and rebuild. and strapping 12 rockets to the back of it. The themes of connection and community are then woven into the game's world and main mechanics of fusing, building, and repairing. It's a level of environmental storytelling beyond compare. Every side quest, every mini-game, every fallen ruin, every line of dialogue, it all paints a picture so convincing you'd swear it wasn't happening on a console that can barely manage to run combat at a frame rate in the double digits. Even the music, which is one of my favorite parts of both games, reflects these changes. At its most obvious, the dynamics of the soundtrack are heard through the desolate, haunting themes of each major region as you find them barren and corrupted, followed by the comforting familiarity of their original versions once peace is restored. But even on a minor level, one so natural that it felt like it had been there the whole time, the simple piano dancing on the breeze of the overworld is now accompanied by woodwinds, gently reminding you that there are more people beside you on your journey, and throughout Hyrule as well. There's plenty of brand new breadcrumbs that make exploration feel a lot more fleshed out than it did in Breath of the Wild. The caves and wells remind you to keep a keen eye on even the most desolate locations, the backpack Koroks and Hudson signs encourage you to build structural supports or transportation devices with nearby parts, and descending to the Sky Islands or diving into chasms reveals two diverse worlds to be explored with the power of the two-fan steering stick hoverbike. But while the moment-to-moment gameplay was still incredibly captivating, it was hard not to feel like Tears of the Kingdom wasn't able to change enough of its identity. This isn't so much of a negative as it is wishful thinking, as a friend of mine said it feels gluttonous to ask for more, but the major differences and discoveries are often isolated to the game's main events. The most exciting moments, the moments that caught me off guard and filled me with the same surprise that made Breath of the Wild feel so unique, were often the big ones. Braving a sandstorm-swept Gerudo desert filled with new enemies and sinkholes leading to ancient ruins, exploring the puzzles and minigames scattered across the Sky Islands, building vehicles to cross the treacherous terrain of the depths, searching for the truth about Zelda and the Master Sword, or coming across one of the few new boss types. The regional phenomena breathe new life into the 4 major towns, and the temples feel much more diverse with their own identities and storylines rather than sharing the identical Sheikah construction of the Divine Beasts, but sometimes it feels like they don't go far enough. The game stretches its limited enemy pool even thinner than it did in the first game, so while it's really cool to see the new Gibdo across the Gerudo Desert or the constructs in the Sky Islands, it's a shame that the Stormwind Arc is just constructs, and the Fire Temple is just constructs, and the Water Temple is just constructs. Like, how are you gonna spend half the game telling me that pirates, with a capital Pirates, have invaded Lurelin Village, and then I finally get there and it's just a bunch of bokoblins? And they're not even using cannons or wearing funny pirate hats or anything. For a game dedicated to having new discoveries around every corner, the lack of new monster types and overall mini-boss variety might be its biggest disappointment. Even at its worst, Elden Ring only makes you fight the same boss 3 or 4 times, but in Tears of the Kingdom, there are like 40 of each one. One place where the game did manage to really shake things up is in its heavily expanded gameplay loop. Exploring Hyrule will earn you resources and monster parts for combat, which can be taken into boss encounters that reward you with even stronger parts, to then explore the depths where you can mine Zonai to build vehicles, to search for charges to upgrade your battery so you can build better vehicles that help you explore the Sky Islands to find dispensers for Zonai parts, and old maps that help you explore the depths and find armor. Do you get where I'm going with this? It's that super fun sense of constant distraction, where I'd keep telling myself it was time to do the Water Temple and then spend another 3 nights zigzagging across the map before I actually got there. There's a lot of shit to do in this game, but it does all become a bit predictable. By somewhere around the 20-hour mark, I felt like I already knew a majority of what I was about to find and the rewards I would receive in each new area. Caves are an exciting addition that adds so much depth and complexity to the overworld, but while they can occasionally surprise you with a new layout or piece of gear, a majority of them kinda blend together into one big extraction mission. Mine the rocks, kill the fucking frog, get the gem, and no clip through the ceiling. There's a whole main questline where you go to Hyrule Castle and fight Phantom Ganon, which reveals the existence of a 5th sage, which then leads you to explore the last ring ruin in Kakariko, which leads you to another set of puzzles in Faron that ultimately leads to the storm being cleared in Thunderhead Isles. But you can also just brave the storm. You can explore this whole area with zero fucking visibility like I did, and stubbornly fumble your way around for a couple hours until you find some strange door and discover one of the coolest exploration dungeon sequences in the entire game by accident, not even knowing it existed at all. And this is the kind of discovery that makes the game truly shine. I realize it's a bit silly to say that a game packed with so much content should have expanded even further on an already compelling gameplay loop, but I definitely would have traded a chunk of repetitive hours and a few dozen bubble gems for a bit more of that variety and surprise. However, while this game is a sequel, it is by no means just more Breath of the Wild, nor would I consider it such a direct improvement that the first game is no longer worth playing. I've heard plenty of people say there's no reason to play Breath of the Wild anymore, but I actually think I'd recommend it even more strongly instead of just telling people to skip to the new one, as one of the most interesting parts about Tears of the Kingdom is how its wildly expanded levels of freedom change how you interact with the world. At first, one of the things that surprised me about general reactions to Tears of the Kingdom was the amount of people who loved it but didn't feel the same about Breath of the Wild, which almost didn't make sense. My best guess is that while Breath of the Wild felt like a more relaxing sandbox supplemented by bits and pieces of discovery, Tears of the Kingdom turns everything up to 11 and lets you tear the fucking game in half. With so many more main scenario objectives to explore and a vastly expanded toolset, it's easier to stick to a constant set of engaging activities and find infinite paths to the creative problem solving that defined the first game. In Breath of the Wild, you could decorate your own house. Now you get to fucking build it. It's perfect. Link has so many tools in his arsenal this time around that the developers faced an insane number of design challenges. Is there any form of low ceiling? Well, getting to higher floors isn't an issue, not to mention you can literally walk across air given you have 2 hover stones in your inventory. You have flight, no-clip, weapons, magic, and anything you could imagine on the tip of your arrow. Walking around with the physics gun from Gmod is pretty cool, but I can only imagine that with great power comes hellish game design. Moving boulders used to be a Sisyphean task worthy of a Korok seed, but now you can just pick up the boulder. In the same way Breath of the Wild was about opening your mind to creative possibilities, Tears of the Kingdom is again about choosing whichever path is most fulfilling to you. So it can't build a puzzle with one solution or a combat encounter with any level of intended difficulty. This guy asked for a picture of a Goron in a hot spring, but he never specified that the hot spring needed to be in the picture. This manifests in an absolutely magical experience. Physics, construction, and elemental interactions work just how you'd expect them to, so you don't have to consult the intermediary gamer brain trained from years of technical limitations. You can put stupid contraptions together and things will push, pull, unfold, fly, and explode just like you think they would. And it lets you open your mind to a beautiful form of play that has you struggling to believe the developers actually thought of all that. The fact that you can strap a steering stick to almost any object, give it thrust, and the black magic code running the game just goes, yeah, this is a vehicle now, is... I can't even think of a joke! Getting to redefine the very concept of exploration can make even the simplest discoveries feel exciting. And to be honest, the fact that you can shield surf on minecart tracks like they're grind rails almost forgives every other critique I'm about to bring up in this section. As underwhelming as the abilities in Breath of the Wild often felt, Cryonish. Your limited toolkit felt like it was designed to help your brain develop clever solutions. But while Tears of the Kingdom still lends itself to this type of discovery, it's much easier to entirely skip content rather than cheat or outsmart it, especially when it comes to getting from point A to point B with Link's unlimited mobility. It's clear that the developers realized this to some extent because you aren't allowed to use your own Zonai devices in a shrine, but it isn't that hard to walk in with a rocket already prepared. hard. Pulling off the casual equivalent of speedrun skips felt awesome the first couple times, but there were a lot of areas where I wanted the game to limit my options, disable my Zonai capsules, or even take away my weapons to encourage more creativity. And I think the first place to look is the regional phenomena. I've seen a lot of people say traditional Zelda dungeons are back in a way that was absent from the Divine Beasts, but outside of more unique themings, Tears of the Kingdom is far too open-ended for traditionally designed mazes, puzzles, platforming, and even boss fights. When Link can build a fucking mid-air death laser, it's not much of a stretch to realize he can completely skip the low-gravity bubble climb to the water temple if he has 2 fans and a steering stick. The Fire Temple is this multi-leveled complex of buildings connected by twisting layers of minecart tracks that allow for all sorts of fun moments. You can swing across broken tracks with a hook, change their direction with targets, shield surf on them without a cart. They even have that Indiana Jones shit where you get to attack constructs that pull up beside you. Or you can use a couple rockets to ignore all of it. This isn't a design mistake though, it's an intended compromise of valuing player agency. To make the player engage with an objective in any structured way, the devs had to make things comically locked off or slippery, which they obviously wanted to limit outside of shrines. Even if you're using a rocket to skip an entire dungeon, you're still choosing to do so, which can feel rewarding in its own right. Simply interacting with the game's toolkit and learning how to bend the world to your will is one of the most satisfying parts about Tears of the Kingdom, so it makes sense why these options exist. It's not something that ever impeded on the experience as a whole. I just wish there were a few more limiters in place, because I wanted to engage with the plethora of Zonai devices and mechanics on an even deeper level. Plus, while the sage's abilities are callbacks to the unique gimmicks of past Zelda dungeons, they often feel secondary to the dungeon itself, as you primarily use them to activate each progress point, not actually traverse or solve puzzles like the control systems of the Divine Beasts. As controversial of a take as this might be, I really enjoyed the Divine Beasts, in some cases more than the temples in Tears of the Kingdom, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that less tools in Breath of the Wild meant more conformity to an organized puzzle. You couldn't climb on the walls or easily get past certain areas covered in Ganon gunk, and intricately merging the Divine Beast controls with Link's old powers meant more actual puzzles and a stronger dungeon feeling gameplay-wise. There are plenty of great examples of creative puzzle solving in the temples, like building vehicles to transport limbs around the construct factory, building a ramp out of cooled lava for Yunobo, or finding ways to get to certain chests, like this one on Stormwind Arc where I pulled it out of a grate using 2 icicles. But I just wish I didn't have to hold back on my own solutions in order to see the intended puzzles and cool mechanics the developers created. Oh, and before I'm done rambling about the story content here, I just want to say that the sages are the most baffling design choice in the entire game. Like, a proximity-reliant A-press next to a moving NPC to activate an ability that isn't even worth the clutter of a weird blue ghost on your screen. It's fun when the sages follow you around during their quest lines, participating in cutscenes and shouting little voice lines, but I would have much preferred their abilities just be mapped to a new wheel or button after dungeon completion. That is to say, if I felt any of their abilities were even useful besides Tulin's, considering that lightning, water, and explosions are already well within Link's wheelhouse. The other main area where I feel the game's construction elements are underutilized is in the depths. While repeatedly forcing the player into more constricted areas focused on Zonai construction would take away from the game's philosophy of playing your own way, the depths feel like the perfect place to put the multitude of Zonai devices to the test, since it's almost sad how optional some of them feel to the rest of the game. And nothing makes them feel more optional than the fact that I can only favorite 8 designs, man, come on! Racing challenges require you to not take your hands off the steering stick, forcing you to use the vehicles you build, and I feel like it would have been fun to see this idea in a combat setting. Fighting the Yiga in their camps is a lot more fun when you try to hit them from a flying plane or when you hijack one of their wacky motorcycles instead of bullet time headshotting them for the 30th time. The Master Koga fights are where Tears of the Kingdom experiments most with Zonai device combat, combat, but I still ended up having to sandbag myself so I could actually enjoy each one. Now imagine if instead of being able to shoot him bullet time in the head again, no weapons allowed. The Yiga grab you, take your shit, throw you in a garage and go, alright, try to make something out of all this junk. Then you roll out into an arena and have to duke it out with Master Koga, ramming into weak spots or shooting cannons and beams at his big battle car. Like, wouldn't that be nuts? and bolts. If you didn't see this coming, I don't blame you. If you did see this coming, nice. I didn't play the original Banjo games or Nuts and Bolts growing up, but for most of my adolescent and adult life, various sources led me to believe that Nuts and Bolts was a plague and stain on not just Banjo, but all that is holy. But it's actually pretty fun sometimes. It's far from perfect, yada yada, but I feel strangely compelled to mention it. You know, give the underdog a bit of the credit it deserves. There are so many great ideas scattered throughout its wacky open-ended challenges that feel like they'd be right at home in Tears of the Kingdom. Gotta score as many goals as possible? Why not make a giant set of arms and push all the balls in at once? Need to hit as many dominoes as possible? Instead of crashing into it from the outside, how about from the middle with a plane? No, wider. Even wider plane. There we go. Can't carry enough nuts back up to the suction barrel? Why not just slap the barrel in the back of your truck and carry it down to where all the nuts spawn? Or maybe you just need to win a race. Well, as long as your car is so fucking fast that you can smoke your opponent on the straightaways, who needs any semblance of handling? An escort mission usually elicits a groan from the average gamer, but since running around and killing the enemies isn't enough, you gotta get creative. I tried to make a battle car, but it wasn't quite doing the trick, so my galaxy brain made a giant flying hover cage to protect the guy while I cleared the path. And lastly, while the boss fights work better as a proof of concept than they do in execution, having to chase down Gruntilda and break off pieces of her vehicle is like, that's the dream Master Koga fight. So yeah, I don't know, for Breath of the Wild 3 or Tears of the Kingdom 1.5 or whatever, just like import some of the nuts and bolts code or something. Pretty sure that's how game dev works. While I've dedicated a majority of this section to analyzing certain hiccups in Zelda's open-endedness, it's also interesting to consider that these issues never really impacted the experience as a whole. Like I mentioned earlier, the closer I zoom in, the more I can look for the tiniest cracks. But if I hadn't spent hours talking game design with my YouTube buddies, partially for the purpose of making this video, I probably wouldn't have even thought of half this shit. Except for my complete non sequitur nitpick, which is, why can I only save 64 photos? There are so many things that require pictures: the Hyrulean text, the stable paintings, paraglider designs, random side quests, filling out the compendium, and I'm one of those freaks that just takes pictures in the game for fun. Like, maybe it's because when you do the Terrytown quests, you go, oh, the picture is also saving the models in 3D space for this specific instance. Yes, of course. But if Pura built a fucking ancient iPad with a 1 megapixel camera, why couldn't she at least give me a slightly bigger SD card to take more funny horse pictures? At the end of the day, the pros infinitely beat out the cons when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom's driving philosophy of freedom, but I can't help feeling there's some middle ground the devs could have expanded upon to encourage more creativity while avoiding the threat of a dominant strategy rhythm that can define largely repetitive tasks like backpack Korok delivery. Repeatedly, my favorite moments were when I went out of my way to do something more than the game asked of me on a technical level, and that's where the paradox lies. I wanted to build more, but would such an incredible wellspring of creativity feel less exciting if I was forced to use it too often? Could the Bokoblin Buster V3 in all its glory have been created separately from the innate desire to torture my enemies without laying a finger upon them? If my dumbass can kill a 3-headed dragon with 12 lasers strapped to a floating rock, how the fuck did the Zonai lose to Ganon? Alright, this one's pretty straightforward. The opportunities for diverse combat encounters in Tears of the Kingdom are through the goddamn roof, but the way the scaling and numbers work make it feel like most of them don't matter. Not to mention, Link is just too fucking strong. He was already overpowered enough with the tools he had in Breath of the Wild, and since the sequel doesn't ask significantly more of the player or introduce more than a few new enemy types, I don't really need the shock emitters and lasers and construct heads and homing carts when I still have bow and arrow bullet time the second I gain an inch of height. Not to mention that attaching an eyeball now gives me aimbot. I still found myself experimenting and building fucker war machines, as it's some of the most fun I had in the entire game, but I do wonder if there are ways in which combat could have stayed more engaging for someone like me, who scours every corner and checks under every rock until nothing in the game scares me by the halfway point, since the armor scaling is just... like, I don't even know how they decided that if you have a couple half-decent pieces of armor, getting hit by the final boss barely even sets off Link's pain receptors. First off, making a combat system as expressive as this one focus so heavily on numbers feels weird, especially with how strong weapons become. I love the sense of scrappiness that makes the early hours of both games so dynamic, like when you come across a dangerous camp and need to steal the weapons that enemies drop while frantically picking up the items around them. In Tears of the Kingdom specifically, there's an unbelievable amount of fusion combinations. Mirrors and Dazzle Fruit can blind enemies, a spring on a shield will send them ragdolling backwards, Muddle Buds make enemies attack each other, and Eightfold Long Blades can generate elemental slashes. But once half the enemies in the game are silver bokoblins with massive health bars, it's hard to not lean towards the egregious numbers that you can get from monster parts, or just avoid combat entirely. I understand that players are on all sorts of different skill levels, and Nintendo is definitely going for the all-ages market with this one, but like I mentioned earlier with the Yiga and Master Koga fights, I wish there was some limiter on Link's power to make experimentation and Zonai devices feel more integral to the game's combat, rather than just feeling like a malevolent god toying with his peons, even though I could just whip out another 40 damage construct sword that the game gives me so many of that I can't run out if I want to. Even though difficulty can scare players away in certain settings, an open world RPG is the perfect place to experiment, especially because most content is optional and you can always come back later. That's kind of the whole idea with growing stronger in a role-playing game, and it's what made Elden Ring accessible to so many new fans. Like, what's someone more likely to tell a story about? Them bashing their head into a fight 10 times that they were clearly underpowered for and just barely clutching it out? Or the 20th time they killed a stone talus in one cycle with a spinning heavy attack? I think they were getting there with the Colosseums, but I want them to make me fight 3 Lionels at the same time so I can't just block them with a shield and kill them by backflipping 3 times. Battle Talus, but there's also a Gleeok shooting at me from the sky. Fuck me up, doesn't have to be fair. Nintendo did After Alterna, Darker Side, Champions Road. Let the Zelda fans suffer a little bit. And on the topic of Dark Souls, I would much rather have to find time to heal mid-fight. The fact that I can sit down and enjoy a nice 5-course spaghetti dinner while Link is on fire, ragdolling 60 feet up in the air after getting hit by a fucking icicle lightning strike from a dragon is 1, insane, and 2, removes all stakes from combat unless the enemy is strong enough to literally one-shot you. A lot of these critiques are problems that carry over from Breath of the Wild, but with how open-ended the game feels at its core, I just would have liked to see a few more changes this time around. It's like the friend analogy I made earlier, but after all these years you've known him, he's still kinda picking his nose at the dinner table. I do want to give Tears of the Kingdom plenty of credit where it's due though. There are a ton of genuinely fantastic encounters, and I think a lot of the best ones are when default combat is ignored entirely, the best example being the Colgera fight. In addition to this being one of the best boss themes and the best lead up to a dungeon and also the best dungeon, Colgera is one of my favorite bosses in the game. This is in part because you don't need melee weapons at all. The entire fight takes place in mid-air. It's not particularly challenging, but in addition to being an incredible set piece, the boss's movements and tornadoes still require you to make the most of your limited air mobility, and also let you approach damaging its central cores in different ways. You can shoot them with an arrow when the boss is flying upwards, but you can also skydive straight through them. a solution that's somewhat intuitive while still feeling clever. There's also the lead up to the Fire Temple, where you board a fan plane and have to dodge projectiles while launching Yunobo at giant heads on the peak of Death Mountain, which was actually so fun that I ended up replicating it on my own during the Depths rematches against Marbled Goma. There's also the Proving Ground shrines, where you get to build funny homing carts and a giant battle car, or the final Master Koga fight and the Frenzied Construct variant, where you have to use different tools and Zonai parts to knock a giant construct into an electrified barrier, since it doesn't take damage from regular attacks. In my experience, just about every boss with a unique mechanic and set amount of phases was more engaging than the ones skewed by RPG damage numbers to the point that I could kill them in 1 or 2 cycles. While I still think it's fine for the overworld boss encounters to have set levels of difficulty, I think the story examples I mentioned feel more memorable because they help demonstrate all of the cool features the game has to offer, while asking the player to do more than just pull out their strongest weapon and get spinning. That's most of my thoughts though, and for a game that took me 160 hours to beat, I'd say 13 pages isn't all that bad. So, how the fuck do I transition to my usual artsy emotional thing now? Maybe a quote from a book? Memories' images, once they are fixed in words, are erased. Perhaps I am afraid of losing Venice all at once if I speak of it. Or perhaps, speaking of other cities, I have already lost it, little by little. Video games are software, they're products, they can be reviewed and criticized and picked apart, but they're also stories. Not just the stories they tell, but the stories we become a part of as we play. And the better a game can immerse you in that story, the less it feels like a game altogether. Tears of the Kingdom is a video game, but when I stop for a moment and take a deep breath, it's a work of art. And by making this video, writing, analyzing, hell, even just talking about the game, it almost feels like I am losing the parts I want to hold on to. Before I even started playing, I told myself I was obviously gonna make a video, but it was also overwhelming that I didn't really know what I wanted to say. At first, I was just gonna talk about all my favorite details, like how it's really cool when you dive into the depths and the big horn goes and it goes I'm used to a sort of unorganized experiential mush, yet no matter how much my writing improves, there will always be some ideas that just don't make sense on a page, but artistically speaking, I kinda like that. I like that the demon dragon can't truly exist in writing. I can describe the stunning imagery of Zelda's radiance against the backdrop of the blood moon, or the sound of a triumphant duet between the Arhu and the saxophone, but they only truly exist when I'm holding the controller. I know that from many angles, getting to talk about video games sounds like a job where nothing could go wrong, but as anyone who tries turning a profit from their biggest passions will tell you, your motivations and anxieties can shift in unimaginable ways, and the fact that my favorite thing to do is now entangled with all sorts of responsibility is a strange feeling to confront. A game like Tears of the Kingdom then lands me at a rare crossroads. It's exciting when an experience feels so immersive that I do just get lost in it all, but I'm also left with a profound urge to talk about its magic to whoever I think might listen. Maybe I can't describe exactly what it's like to play a game, but it's fun to try and get close. There seems to be a common sentiment, at least on the internet, that proper game discussion involves rigorous critique, or that withholding criticism is biased, or that analysis of shortcomings is incomplete without designing new solutions. But sometimes, all I really want to say is, game's good. It's easy for me to get caught up in the spirals of disappointment, negativity, and hypocrisy that surround the AAA industry, even when it concerns a game as well-loved as Tears of the Kingdom. But despite wanting to share that I believe there are still things it could have improved upon, it's just as important to me that every single day, for a month and a half, all I wanted to do was dive back in and explore every inch of Hyrule, even if all I had time to do was pick up a single Korok seed. The further I progressed, the more I shifted from wanting to play as much as possible to ripping myself away because I didn't want things to end. I continued to find beauty between the lines, not just in the spirit of discovery or an epic battle, but in the serenity that fills so much of the space in between. The sense of peace in the moments where I'd look out at the sun as it peeked over the edge of the coastline, and even though I was just playing a video game, it felt like it meant something. Despite the unbearable weight of expectations placed upon it, Tears of the Kingdom still managed to spread its wings, take to the skies, and soar beyond anything I could have ever dreamed video games might be someday. It took me nearly 2 months to roll credits, but once I did, there was no sense of regret, no yearning to go back or do things differently, because I have now played Tears of the Kingdom, and I hadn't before. I'm not saying that video games alone make my life fulfilling, but when I'm on my deathbed, I don't think I'll be regretting the time I put into this one. And in the end, that means the game's pretty good. They still won't let me register Mr. Bones at the stable though, so I'm actually changing my score.